An historic lawsuit between homeowners that live downwind of Rocky Flats and the operators of the facility was announced this week. The $375 million settlement would be shared between the 15,000 homeowners involved who claimed that their property values decreased due to plutonium releases at the facility. Patty, Westward has been covering quite well Rocky Flats for decades. This was an enormous settlement to be announced. It still needs to be approved, but it's reportedly both sides are happy. And but it was what, about 26 years in the making, 27 years in the making. Your thoughts?
Well, who would think you would talk about this story for this many decades? We, in 1989 was when Rocky Flats, the nuclear weapons plant, 16 miles upwind of Denver, was raided by the FBI. And the grand jury that investigated the evidence seized then wanted to indict not just Department of Energy officials, but officials from Rockwell International, which ran it at the time, for environmental crimes. Instead, the Justice Department sealed a deal in 1992 which cost Rockwell less than the bonuses they'd been paid. And Rocky Flats never made another plutonium component for triggers. It's been cleaned up. It's supposed to become a refuge. The year after that raid was when these property owners, who'd been complaining for decades about the secrecy at Rocky Flats, the problems at Rocky Flats, filed this lawsuit. That was 26 years ago. Many of the plaintiffs have passed on. The case went to trial a decade ago. Judge John Kane, who was a good judge, presided. The decision came out, it was almost $1 billion then. That was thrown out because of jury instructions. Now we have this settlement. The biggest outrage, though, is not just how long it's taken, but the fact that Dow, which first ran Rocky Flats, and Rockwell, which ran it the second time, they won't be paying the fine. The fine is going to be paid by the feds.
Wow, that's a great detail that I think a lot of people are probably going to miss. They think, okay, finally big companies are paying this off, but it's not. You're right.
I mean, the people deserve the money, but it's coming from the federal government.
Wow. Todd, you've been a fantastic investigative reporter, especially with your work in Complete Colorado. You see a work like this, where obviously there's a big deal, there had to be a lot of digging, federal investigations, the whole bit, but then taking this long to have some sort of settlement. What are your reactions?
Well, I think I'm going to shock my partner to the right here, Patricia Calhoun, when I say, you know, I could almost look at the $375 million judgment and say that that's not enough. Basically, when you look at the time, there are a lot of choices that people lose by having lost property value over the course of 26 years. People use their home values to finance college educations. As Patty said, a lot of these people are deceased now. The decisional value that was taken away from these people for so long is what really is the key factor here. She mentioned the $1 billion judgment that was thrown out. Still, I really do think you could make an argument that $375 million, not only should it compensate those people, it should be at a level that it sends a significant message to the government, in particular about the secrecy that was always imposed in those cases. Now, of course, it was Cold War era, so you can argue for more secrecy back then, but still, when it comes to the safety of the citizens you're supposedly fighting for, that's what really gives you the heartburn and makes you feel so empathetic for all of these 15,000 homeowners in this case.
Penn, you're our esteemed lawyer at the table today. Were you surprised by the amount? Were you surprised by the length of time it took? And do you think it'll be approved?
Justice delayed is justice denied, and that's what's happened to all of these homeowners. And Todd and Patty are both right in terms of the impact on their lives versus the I will say, minuscule payment they'll receive so far after the fact. And frankly, this is one of those deals that really upsets people, because you've already got, and we're seeing it this political season, tremendous distrust with government. And now clearly you have government finally entering into a settlement, and they're going to say this settlement is not an admission of guilt. Yeah, it is. Everybody knows that. And so it's just another instance where you keep hearing for 26 years, trust us, trust us, trust us, everything's A-OK, and clearly it isn't. And so, you know, it's going to be interesting to see what the repercussions are. And I will say my former colleague, Wes McKinley, is now vindicated, because he said for years there was an issue here and nobody believed him. But it's just sort of tragic. I mean, you got the right result. Yeah, it'll be approved, it'll be upheld, and they'll go forward and implement the settlement. But the sad reality is it should not have taken this long. And the other piece of this is all the workers who worked at Rocky Flats over the years who were impacted. I mean, one of my neighbors in Boulder ended up dying, and they eventually concluded it was based on some of the exposures he experienced when he worked at Rocky Flats for most of his life. So it's tragic, it's unfortunate, and hopefully our government and the contractors they work with sort of live and learn, but we're all at risk until they do.
Justine, this is a big part of at least recent Colorado history, but it's one of a variety of things we see. We see the big Gold King mine issue. There's a lot of things where there's a big problem and little people, just a small group of homeowners, landowners, things like that, fighting the good fight. When you see a decision like this, perhaps less money than was deserved, taking well over 2 decades, does it take away from other people looking to fight those good fights? To take that energy away from other battles we might see in our community?
Definitely, and I agree with all the panelists here. It's maybe a little too late in this case. I've watched this case my whole life, 26 years it's went on, and we've discussed the Rocky Flats saga since I was a little girl. And now, as an adult watching it come full circle, it is kind of disheartening to see that, people would take so long and fight so hard. And there are so many communities fighting all types of environmental injustice in the state. And it makes you really wonder, is the fight worth it? Are we going to get to an endpoint that is really justice for people?
Mm-hmm. So you should think about neighborhoods like Globeville and Elyria that could be generations before they really see change.
Oh yeah, definitely. I actually grew up around that neighborhood, and we've spent lots of time testing soil, contaminated soil, and we're still discussing how we, resolve a lot of the impacts of the pollution there that went on for decades.